Hi, everyone. It is 6 o'clock, and so in order to be respectful of everyone's time, we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Cheyenne Meadows, and I'm the High Ability Learning Specialist at the Nebraska Department of Education. And I'm really excited to have my good friend and colleague here, Patty Longley. She is a teacher in Rutherford County Schools, which is in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, a suburb of Nashville. And I had the pleasure of teaching with her when I was working in Tennessee. And so she has a lot of really great information, and she's going to give you guys a really excellent presentation tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Patty.
Okay. All right. Hi. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm going to give a little bit of information about myself, and then I'm going to go into this idea of rewriting perfect for high ability learners. I always start out this kind of presentation with sharing some memes, and I'm going to let you see my beautiful face for about 15 more seconds, and then I am going to stop the camera because sometimes Zoom and I don't get along very well, and it will stop sharing screens or recording or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that, but I will be back at the end. Okay, so one of the things that I always like to do is to share these two memes not only with parents but with students as well. So this first one on the left right here says, "You were gifted and talented in elementary school, choose your path." And it has anxiety, depression, fear of failure that plagues your every decision, intense guilt that you'll never live up to your earlier potential, good at crossword puzzles, or all of the above. And then to the right is this following. "If you were a gifted or talented child who grew into an anxious adult with fragile self-worth and a perfectionist streak that makes you abandon things if you're not good at them immediately, clap your hands." And while they are funny, especially as an adult who went through the gifted program when I was in K-12, they're also terrifying to me because it's now my job to teach gifted students. So part of my journey is as a K-12 product of the of um, Tennessee schools, and I'm from East Tennessee, and I went to William Blount High School, but I came to MTSU to go to major in English and to get my license to teach. And so for the past 13 years, I've been a teacher in Rutherford County schools, and I just finished my 7th year teaching gifted students. Because of some of the wonderful mentors I've had along the way, I was encouraged to apply to the University of Connecticut's gifted uh, talent, creativity and talent development master's program. And so that's currently where I am. So I'm a former gifted child. I am a teacher of the gifted. And I also am a parent of two gifted children, and my partner is a gifted student person as well. And so we have Eleanor. She's 7. She looks like she's about 5.5. She's going to be tiny forever. And then Zelda is my mini me. She is 10 years old. And then there's Roy, he's my husband. They were all in a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And I bring those up to you today because Eleanor she's got that idea of, if I'm not immediately good at something, I'm just going to give up. I'm never going to try to work better at it. And then, like I said, Zelda has to be the best in everything. She usually is, but that's because I'm a little bit biased. But she hasn't hit that point where she really knows how to persevere through when things are a little bit hard. And then Roy and I have talked about both of our experiences going through school systems where we were or were not identified as gifted students, and really trying to deal with what it means to live up to those potentials that labels were given to us. So that's part of where I'm coming from. And then this screen right here is just to remind me to tell you that I'm not a school psychologist or a licensed psychologist for anything. And so if you do have a kiddo who is really dealing with a lot of anxiety with perfectionism and maladaptive perfectionism, then these are just some resources for you to use. And really the best place for you to talk to is your students, guidance counselors, or even your pediatrician. So for our roadmap, I have these for my agenda: words, words, words. We've got myths about giftedness, definitions of giftedness, perfectionism, both healthy and unhealthy. Then we're going to look at some perfectionism itself. There's some clusters of behaviors, and with each of those behaviors, I have some strategies to share with you, and then some general strategies to use, not just for perfectionism, but for things that I use in my daily life. So according to the National Association for Gifted Children, There are 11 notable myths, and among them are these three about gifted students and gifted education. So, whenever I talk about what it is like to be a gifted student or a high ability learner, my students laugh when they see these three. Gifted students don't need help, they'll do fine on their own. With those poor grades, that student definitely isn't gifted. And then, of course, the ever popular gifted students are happy, popular, and well adjusted. Well, I'm not saying for certain these three myths are rooted in the ideas of gifted students and perfectionism. It's easy to see how they could be. And so to bust these kind of myths for our students, it's first to know the definition of gifted. So who are the gifted? What does gifted mean? Where do we see gifted? When are they gifted? Why are they gifted? And how are they gifted? And I could go down that rabbit hole of trying to figure out a nice definition for us to use, but not even the experts really agree. So there's a lot of text on your screen, and if you do watch this recording and you want to read that all to yourself, please, I encourage you to do so. But I'm going to focus on these three highlighted places. The first one is this idea of their contribution to self and society. And then that was from the definition of gifted from 1972 from the US Department of Education. And then we have students with gifts and talents perform or have the capability to perform. And that's the National Association for Gifted Children's current definition. If you were to go to NAGC online, you would see that. And then this is from the regulations governing high ability learners from Nebraska. And it says to develop those capabilities fully. So we can go back to those three myths, the idea that gifted students are going to be fine on their own, they don't need help. Those poor grades definitely mean that that kid is not a gifted student, and they're well adjusted. And we can see where those myths and these three areas kind of are incongruous with one another. So I go back to those memes as well, to put the future of society on the shoulders of a student, a person who is under the age of 18 for a lot of them, well, definitely for them, is to put a lot of pressure on their shoulders. And they don't have all of the necessary tools to be able to achieve to their true potential. And so that's where gifted services come in and the social and emotional aspect of it. So most of our students automatically do not have that resilience or that stick-to-itiveness to strive for that excellence that these three definitions seem to demand of them. So we can see where that idea of perfectionism can come around, whether it is an actual true perfectionism from a student, or even kind of I call it a learned perfectionism, where students they think they're supposed to be perfect because everybody tells them they're supposed to be perfect, but they really may not have as much interest in being perfect. And so this leads me into this definition of perfectionism. Perfectionism is a condition in which a person focuses on achieving high goals, and it may be healthy or unhealthy. And with healthy perfectionism, and I do write the good, the bad, and the devastating, so healthy perfectionism is sometimes called normal or adaptive perfectionism. And it represents the characteristics that are positive for students, including gaining a sense of pride from achievements and improvement and a drive for success. I asked one of my daughters the other day, she asked me what the definition of perfectionism, and I told her a little bit about what it meant. And she said, well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I said, well, it can be. But there are sometimes when you want somebody to have that nice, healthy perfectionism streak, for example, with like brain surgery, I would like for the brain surgeon who is working on the aneurysm there to make sure that they've gotten all of the thing out of my head that's going to hurt me or kill me. And I encourage perfectionism in that area. But for sometimes we have what's called unhealthy or neurotic or a maladaptive perfectionism. And it's that arresting type of perfectionism. It's the type of perfectionism that most often comes to mind when parents and teachers think of their gifted children. It represents the perfectionism that causes concern about a student's behavior and well-being and is focused on unrealistic expectations for performance or outcomes. So overly developed self-criticism, stress, procrastination, fear of failure, and risk avoidance are some of those common signs of unhealthy perfectionism. So we are the adults in our children's lives, who both as their teachers and as their parents. And so it's up to us to kind of be on the lookout for what those maladaptive perfectionism behaviors are. And we can look at them in terms of clusters of types of behaviors. So we have the aggravated accuracy assessor, the risk evader, the controlling image manager, the academic achiever, and the procrastinating perfectionist. So I'm going to go over some of these behaviors and how they cluster together to give this quote unquote type of giftedness. And then I will provide some of the signs that this person or some of the behaviors that a kiddo might be exhibiting, and then give you some strategies. Before I go into all of that, I will say that at the end of this presentation, I have a QR code and a tiny URL leading to a Padlet where you can ask any unanswered questions from this presentation. I'll also have handouts available there for you to download as PDFs, and I'll keep that up for about a week to hit the people who are watching this as a recording, and it'll be a way for you to ask me some more questions if I'm not able to answer them fully in this presentation. Talking about perfectionism is the thing that I can do a lot of, but I know that I don't want to go over your time tonight. So we're going to start with academic achievers. And at first blush, it seems like it's the poster child for healthy perfectionism. But it's not a lack of effort that we have with these kiddos, but it's too much effort. And unfortunately, the academic achiever's identity is tied to every mistake as a mark of failure. The destination is the focal point and not the journey. So academic achievers often have identities tightly tied to their academic achievement. Thus, imperfect achievement at school may lead to imposter syndrome. And that's something we hear a lot of in gifted, that idea of imposter syndrome, like everybody says I'm this gifted person, but I really have no idea how to do this difficult math equation or to balance this chemistry equation correctly. So some of those behaviors that are associated with academic achievers, like I said, the identity is tied to academic achievements and performance. It's overly focused on grades. It's concerned with less than 100%. Earning an A- is a failure. There's a focus on mistakes, which are viewed as a sign of failure and a flaw in identity. And these kiddos may agonize over turning in perfect work. They struggle with doing homework, which is viewed as an evaluation of intelligence. And then they expect mastery on first attempt. So that may be a kiddo you know in your home, or it may be an example of how you were when you were a student. So here are some strategies to kind of meet with that. One of the first ones is de-emphasize grades, and I put that in on capital letters. As a part of my practice in the classroom is students have to try really hard to earn lower than a 93 in my class, which is an A in my classroom. As long as they are putting forth effort and taking academic risks, then I reward them for those academic risks, because they don't have to worry about whether it's an A or not. It's probably going to be. Another thing to do is to celebrate learning and growth. What did you learn today? Not what did you make on your test today? Did you get that A+ on that paper? Not how did you feel about looking up these sources, and did it change your opinion about this particular issue? Another thing to do is to be an example in your own mistakes. I mess up all the time. There's probably a typo through this PowerPoint presentation, and I will point it out and say, well, that's what I get for not proofreading. Or I may misspell something in front of my students, or I can be completely wrong about something that I'm presenting as a fact in my class or to my own children, and I own those mistakes. Another thing to do is to talk about flawed protagonists who still excel. I am a huge Marvel fan. I love the Avengers, and for all of his brilliance, Tony Stark is a flawed individual. He's still able to do these amazing things, but he's flawed. And so he's not a perfect individual, but he's still able to excel. And then the best thing to do for talking to your academic achievers, and really for all of these types of perfectionists, is to discuss with them their school goals and their school needs in off-peak times. So it may be going on vacation over the weekend to see grandma or something, and you talk about what's coming up that semester. There's no stress in a trip to grandma's, at least not for school. So it's an off-peak time that will help them to think about their grades without it being a pressure. And you can see I already made a mistake. I forgot to put that parentheses right there. That's okay. We're just going to keep on going. Another type of cluster behavior results in what we call aggravated accuracy assessors. And I can always tell when one of these kiddos comes into my class without them even talking to me at first, because they'll sit there and they'll write their name in pencil and they'll bear really hard down with their pencil, or they'll erase their first name several times until it looks just perfect. Or if they're learning cursive, they rewrite and rewrite their names in cursive until it's absolutely 100% going to look the best, and it's the best example of that cursive E that's ever been given. So they're the ones who do trace over their writing over and over, or they erase and rewrite everything. Um, so much like the academic achiever, the aggravated accuracy assessor focuses almost exclusively on micro editing, or the end result instead of the process of it. So sometimes we will see this in our gifted and talented and high ability learners as asynchronous development, and they understand how something should be, how a product should look, but they may lack the rudimentary skills to get to that point in their ideal product. And so they try to do it over and over again, not understanding necessarily that they just lack that basic rudimentary skill. And it has nothing to do with their intelligence. It has everything to do with gaps in their education or gaps in their skills. So aggravated accuracy assessors are overly focused on precision and on a flawless final product, and they are not enjoying or taking pride in the process. And so some behaviors with that are goals are focused on precision and flawless work, focus is completely on end product and not process, deviation from their plan or the rules results in frantic repairing or redos, becomes aggravated at self for not doing things exactly right, and maybe experiencing asynchronous development, constantly evaluates projects and becomes frustrated with his or her work, and repeatedly redoes work, and may even hide their work from others. That's something that if you have a kiddo who does all their math in their head, it may be because they don't want you to see their process, and they'll just give you that answer. But really, we need to see what the process is, because there could be a flaw in it and a shortcut that they think is a good shortcut, but not necessarily. And so it's important to kind of encourage them to show you that work. And again, showing when you make those mistakes as well can help that. So here's some more strategies for helping your aggravated accuracy assessor. Help children set goals in multiple areas of life, not just school, so such as extracurriculars and other interests. So if you have a kiddo who is interested in weightlifting, it's all about their personal gains. It's not about, or their personal best. It's not about necessarily what their friend is lifting, but that you can help them focus on how they can be better than their previous version of themselves. And then it's also important to distinguish between realistic and unrealistic goals. I cannot write the next War and Peace in a week at all. So that's not a realistic goal. I'd have to teach myself Russian for first of all, let alone to write a complex novel like that to that magnitude. To distinguish between short, medium, and long-term goals is also key, um, especially for long-term projects. And then model those mistakes again, and that's super important. Yes, our kids look up to us to be their examples of how to be in the world and how to navigate our careers and even in our parenting. But we also make mistakes, and it's important to tell them that when it happens. So encourage your children to realize their own limitations. I was a music major first, and then I realized I'm probably a little tone deaf, and so I had to come to that realization that I was not going to be able to be a professional clarinet player or a music teacher or a band director the way I wanted to be. And that's fine, because I can still enjoy playing the clarinet on my own, or I can listen to music without it becoming my entire identity. Discuss problems of asynchrony. Eleanor is a key example of that. She looks like she's 5.5. She has a growth deficiency, and she's on some treatment plans for that. But she played soccer for a few years, and then all of her friends on her soccer team hit growth spurts. And she can dribble that ball up and down the field. She can score goals as long as somebody with longer legs is not there to take the ball away from her. And so she has a hard time with that. So it's also a good idea to help your kids to prioritize. So if there's a massive paper due in a week, but at the end of the semester there's a chemistry or a science fair to do, it's probably better to focus a little bit on that paper first before turning to the major science fair project. Okay. So another one that we have is, oh, I did a thing. The risk evader. And I talked to somebody recently about being a risk evader. So risk evaders are afraid to take chances that might expose the fact that they are not perfect, refusing to try because they're afraid they'll fail. And this is also linked to academic achievers. Just because you have a high ability learner who is making an A in all of their classes or even scoring at the 99th percentile, if it's not an appropriately advanced class for them, they're underachieving. And it may be that they're evading those more difficult classes so that they can maintain those high grades. And so some of those behaviors, other than dropping to a lower class in math or whatnot, is that they're afraid of taking a chance or trying something challenging because it will expose their imperfections. They hide their weaknesses and their flaws. There's a feeling of failure resulting in inaction and avoiding particular tasks. And they're overly focused on outcomes and the possibility of imperfection. They can also be experiencing that asynchronous development. Again, that we come up against that a lot with high ability learners and gifted and talented students because the brains are working much faster than the way their bodies are developing. And they may lack something like manual dexterity, or in the case of my daughter Eleanor, long enough legs to keep up with her fellow soccer players. So some of the strategies for those risk evaders is to adopt activities that are fun, but not an area of strength. My daughter, Zelda, she is very good in ELA, but she is not as good in math. It's her area of relative weakness compared to her ELA strengths, but that only focuses her more on trying harder math things. And so that's something that we've tried to cultivate so that she doesn't shy away from the hard things. So emphasize enjoyment over perfection. As a family, we like to put together puzzles and we like to play board games a lot. And sometimes we don't always follow those rules or we lose whatever game that we're playing, but we still have fun and enjoy hanging out with each other and being part of a family together. And so upon completion of projects, you notice areas of strengths and for improvement. So one of the things that we can do is that we can focus on a paper. For example, if a student is writing an argumentative essay and they've worked very hard to come up with their claim, but they're kind of weak in their counterclaim area, then we can notice the strength of that claim and how they've supported it and look for other ways to improve that counterclaim. And that's even at home with you as a family. You can discuss something that you see on the news and you can come up with claims and even counterclaims. You can kind of have those informal debates. Let's work on your counterclaim. And it's that idea of playing devil's advocate with your kiddos. So that may be more for your middle school and high school students, but it is something that will help them in that area. And then there's this idea of sharing joy upon completion of school projects or assignments rather than waiting for the grade results. For my daughter, one of my daughters this year, she is at a magnet school and she had to do a genre project. And it was no fun for her because she not only had to read all these books, and they were many. I think she had to read 16 her second quarter. She also had to pass some tests and she had to do some activities for some of them. Well, she did not do a great job on keeping up with some of her items that she needed to turn in order to earn that A. But one of the best things that she was able to get from that project is that she got to read all of these awesome texts. So the grade wasn't great, but we got to talk about good texts that were able to help her focus on her development as a human being and not just as someone who earns grades. And so we celebrated those assignments when she turned them in, even before the grades. I told her it was a miracle that she made it through this year of COVID-19 as a distance learner and an in-person learner. and didn't have to repeat the 4th grade. So that's awesome. Another thing is to encourage intellectual risk taking. And I talked a little bit about that with my students. One of the things that I've noticed that if we know what the grading scale is going to be or that rubric is going to be, we can figure out ways to look at that rubric as a family and say, okay, this is going to earn you probably a B. And a B is something that, you know, it'll help you pass the paper, or it's a low A, it'll help you pass the paper. But wouldn't it be cool if you took this risk and you learned from it? And so that may be something that if you encourage your child to take that intellectual risk, to talk with their teacher at the beginning of the project and say, hey, I want to do this with my paper, but I don't know if it's going to be successful or not. So I was hoping that we could sit down and talk a little bit about it, or even to come up with a hypothesis for a science fair project. And it might not be your typical which paper towel is the strongest paper towel based on how much water it can hold. I may or may not have done that science project a couple of times when I was in elementary and middle school. I did not take intellectual risks with my science, and I didn't learn as much from it. So those are just some of the things for our risk evaders. And then there's the controlling image managers. And I'm going to tell a little bit of story about one of my former students. I taught her when she was from the time she was in the 6th grade until she left middle school in the 8th grade. And in the 7th grade, she made the state track meet for her area. And she did not win first place or anything like that. But the next year, she was predicted to win first place in the state. And one of the things that she did, and I went to the track meet to encourage her and to cheer her on, is that she kind of made herself sick on purpose. And that's the controlling image manager. They expect themselves to be perfect and want others to see them as being perfect. Therefore, they set up situations so that they have no perceived flaws, and their image as perfect is not tarnished. So I would have won first place on that track meet if I had not been sick, if I hadn't thrown up right beforehand, or if I had had enough sunblock and my shoulders weren't on fire. So some of those behaviors are they want others to perceive them as perfect, and they're focusing on avoiding others' detection of their flaws and imperfections, eliminating self from competitive situations rather than not succeeding as a way to avoid risk. They manage that image by saying they could have succeeded if they had even attempted the task. And they control that image because being perfect is tied to their identities. And this is something that may create a rift with their peers because they may be resented by peers for not competing in a fair way. One of the things that we're doing this summer to make sure we don't have that dreaded regression in learning for our daughters is we have the Brain Quest books, and one of them suggested that we draw 9 squares on the sidewalk and put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and we throw our rocks, and whoever could get the highest score based on math or multiplication won that round. Well, Eleanor does not have as great of that hand-eye coordination, and so she missed a lot, and it would just go flying off of the board completely. Well, she quit because it was not fair to her because she was so tiny. And that became kind of a drag for the rest of us who were playing the game because we had figured out a way to make it work with our own limitations. And so we had to work with her to figure out how she could still play the game without it alienating her family. So strategies for controlling these image managers is to address the frustrations from classmates through role playing, especially for those younger students or even students who might be twice exceptional and who benefit from social modeling through role playing, just to see, well, this is something that could happen in real world situation, and here are ways that we can deal with that. So discuss competition using media, and that's even watching the Olympics coming up, or to discuss how something is perceived in a novel, like the Triwizard Tournament in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. So you discuss that competition and you use media as examples, and it becomes a way for students to be able to focus on that kind of rift that comes between the characters, or that rift that comes from competing at a national or international level between among the peers, and how are ways to deal with that. Another thing to do is to help children set personal goals and not comparative goals. I talked a little bit about that earlier in terms of like bodybuilding. I had the pleasure of sitting in on a meeting recently for a student who will be joining the 6th grade wrestling team as a 5th grader. And he is super excited about that, even knowing that those 6th, 7th, and 8th graders are going to be much better. They're going to be bigger and they're going to have more experience than he will. And so he's not comparing himself to them. He's comparing himself to where he would be if he were on the elementary wrestling team instead, where he would probably dominate and not get any better because he's not able to learn from someone who is better than himself. So encourage that risk taking as well. That is a risk for him as a 5th grader to be able to wrestle with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And then applaud your children's attempts and willingness to compete, especially in areas that are relative weaknesses. I talked about Zelda earlier and how she's really good at ELA and math isn't her strong suit. Well, she's going to try out for those math teams. Today I suggested she download chess instead of play Roblox again for the 30th time this week. And so she doesn't really know how to play chess, but that's something that she can attempt to learn, and it will help her in other areas, even if she isn't that great at it. And then finally, the next one is my favorite, not just because of the alliteration, and my name is also starts with a P, although the other ones do have alliteration. I refer to myself as procrastinating perfectionist Patty. It's a little bit more of a mouthful to say than peppermint Patty. When I did not know that I was doing this until I was a junior in college, and this is a story I share with my students and I've shared with my own children. But procrastinating perfectionists have a perfect vision in their mind, have a perfect outcome that they expect to reach, and have very high standards for themselves and their products. But they fear that they are not able to achieve that vision. So this fear paralyzes them from taking action, leading them to procrastination. So I celebrated this as a strength of mine until I was 21 years old. I could wait until the very last minute and write an essay one night before it was due for my college classes and still earn, in that A minus to A range because ELA was my strength, just like it's my mini-me Zelda's strength. But then the papers started getting harder the more I went through college and procrastinate. And I still have this perfect vision. I've seen what papers that look like that I turn in. I earn A's on them. I know what they look like. This is my jam. I can do this. So I'm just still going to wait until the last minute. And then I started missing deadlines because I wasn't starting and I started losing points. And that's also when I found out that I had an anxiety disorder that my giftedness had been masking my entire collegiate career, my academic career up until that moment. So I resonate a lot, or procrastinating perfectionists resonate a lot with me. And so here are those behaviors that fear's inability to achieve vision of perfection, paralyzing them from action. I can't tell you how many times I've started the next great teen fiction novel and stopped writing it because I fear the inability to achieve that vision. Has intentions to start but never does or puts it off until the last minute. Becomes frustrated or disappointed that when they finally start, the time is limited and their ideal cannot be reached. And sometimes they control image, just like the image controllers, by explaining their imperfections as a lack of time for preparation or completion. Oh, I would have earned an A plus if I had not waited until the last minute to write this paper. It may do high quality work, but struggle to commit to working on the task and beginning the work. And all sorts of typos on that page, and that's okay because I don't have to be perfect on my papers all the time. So those are some of those behaviors, and you may even see some of yourself in those as I have in rereading this book these past couple of weeks and going through and making my slides. So for strategies for these procrastinating perfectionists, help your children find ways to relax their standards during crunch times. The last 3 weeks of school is not the time to dwell on making everything absolutely perfect or to micro edit. That was always my other big issue, as part of that aggravating accuracy assessor. I always micro edited papers. So crunch time is not the time to focus on those things. Crunch time is the time to get your product finished and turn it in and get feedback for the next time. Help your children make a plan for finishing long-term assignments. And that's the idea of making short-term goals, mid-term goals, and long-term goals. And then check in regularly with your children to help maintain good work habits. A lot of our students in our school system almost all of the middle schools and even some of the elementary schools have student agendas, and we use that as a communication tool, yes, between the teachers and the parents, but it's also a way for children to learn how to start planning and to write in study schedules. And so it may be that either you can encourage your student to use those same agendas, or you can do a bullet journal and let them make it their own. And I'm a big fan of bullet journals. If you have never made one, it can be frustrating and amazing all at one time, but it did help some of my students to make their own bullet journals. They took ownership of writing out their own schedules, and that could be something that could help as well. Find non-stressful times to discuss time management with your children. So that goes along with making sure you bring some of the stuff up during non-peak time when they're not trying to finish for the semester, or it's not Monday morning and they have a massive test that day. And yes, we know that they should have been studying it for about a week or so instead of cramming at the last minute. Show your students or your children how to ask their teachers for advice in working on long-term projects. That's scary to do. It's really scary, especially for students who are supposed to have all the answers. So if they're elementary students, that could be another opportunity to role play. I'll be your teacher, or I'll be you and you be the teacher, and I'll show you how I would ask for help. Or if it's part of a middle school project, just encouraging your child to reach out to their teachers. I do that occasionally I suggest to my parents whose kids are learning how to advocate for themselves as part of their goals for the year. I will ask them to email me as well to make sure I also create the opportunity for the student to reach out to me, and to their perception it's on their own, but really we're kind of helping them figure that out. And once they start advocating for themselves, even with a little bit of help from mom and dad, then that carries into high school and even to college, where they're able to ask for help for something they may not get immediately. And then use family projects as a way to model appropriate behaviors and healthy perfectionism. We love to put together puzzles in my family. And that can be frustrating in and of itself, especially because you have about 5 different personalities who have 5 different ways of doing a puzzle. But we started learning together and figuring out, the vision, we have it here, is supposed to be this picture. So let's come up with a plan. And that can be different for each kind of puzzle. We have a massive All the World is Stage Shakespeare puzzle that we're about to put together, and all of the pieces look the same. So that's something that we as a family can work on to model, the adults can model that appropriate behavior and to achieve that kind of healthy perfectionism. So that's just another consideration, is to have those puzzles in the house. Okay, so I know that I went through this quickly, and I know that Cheyenne is recording this, and you will have access to it on the Padlet after tonight. But so these again are the clusters, and I use these bubbles that are sort of touching, but not really, but actually are touching to, they all overlap. And just because we have a set of behaviors that we've clustered under the risk-evader category doesn't mean that these are the 5 sole types of perfectionists. Just like gifted and talented and high ability learners come in all shapes and sizes, maladaptive perfectionists can as well. So it's an idea of not attacking, but responding to these behaviors rather than fixing the child. It's offering a different way to look at that and saying, this isn't who you are as a person all the time. This is just a behavior that we can correct if we practice that correction. So while these strategies for each of these types of perfections are helpful, the ones in the preceding screen, I'm going to go over a few last strategies that may not necessarily just be for perfectionists, but just something that I also use in my life and in dealing with my own fear of failure. And so we've not promoting growth mindset, and the idea of a growth mindset isn't new. I just finished up my 2nd year at a school, and in the 7th grade hallway, they have a mural for the power of yet. And it's these statements where I can't do it to I can't do it yet. And being more specific, I just can't solve quadratic equations, or to I will ask questions to figure out how to solve quadratic equations on my own, and so forth, and things like that. So even promoting growth mindset for high ability learners, because as we know, it's not our brains are not set to be one certain way. Our abilities are not necessarily set. They can grow if we learn how to promote growth mindset with our kiddos. So the first thing is to I love things that I can break down into cutesy wootsy mnemonic devices. And so we have growth, and the first one is to give appropriate praise. And I put a star beside that because it's very important to me that I work with my parents to learn how to give appropriate praise to their students. I also work with my faculty to learn how to give appropriate praise. One of the things that my students have said to me is, my social studies teacher said that they didn't understand why I made a B. Aren't I the gifted kid? Or they said that they didn't even have to read my paper because it's me and it's probably an A. And that's not good praise either. So giving appropriate praise is important. Another one is to reinforce that risk taking, and it's not riding your bicycle down a hill without a helmet, but it's that idea of trying out for a play. Maybe their kiddo has never auditioned for a play, and that's a risk for them to put themselves out there. And so you can say you can go try out for this play, and maybe you don't get a part, but that's amazing that you are able to put yourself out there and to go through that process. There are opportunities that you can have from mistakes. Um, I watch a lot of reality TV where they have to make things. I blame Project Runway and when I was in college a lot. And one of the ones that I like to watch is Blown Away, and it's a Netflix show. And the very second episode was supposed to be about making glass food dishes, and this one contestant went completely rogue and just said, I don't like food. I'm going to do this instead. And well, that's not what the brief said. That's not what his clients asked for. And so he was eliminated, and rightly so. But he said, I can't wait to make my next mistake so I can learn from it. And I thought, as a creator and as an artist, if for something like glass making, that's a phenomenally strong thing to take away from being eliminated from a contest that could make or break your career. Another one is to watch what you say. I talked about the social studies teacher who said, why didn't you get an A on this? You're supposed to be gifted. We can't say that to a gifted student. And even calling ourselves dumb. I'm sorry, girls, mommy made a dumb mistake. Or instead of we're saying, oh, this is an error I made. This is what I could have done. I will make sure I try to do that in the future. So even putting ourselves down is just teaching them that they're supposed to do that as well. So then you teach the mindset, you teach the growth mindset. And then this one's hard too, is to have a growth mindset yourself, to be a model for your students. And if we can't be a model for our students and our children, then who is going to be a model for them, and who's going to keep them from fulfilling those quote unquote prophecies of the gifted child from those two memes? So on this next screen, I have ways to encourage growth mindset, and there's a lot on there. I'm going to go through it quickly, just kind of just conversations you can have after you pick your kiddo up from school, or after they get home from the bus, or even at the dinner table. What was the hardest part or most challenging part of your day? And talking to them about why that. Sometimes it'll be interpersonal activities, which happens, especially if we have some of our maladaptive perfectionists who are alienating their peers. And then sometimes it'll be about school. Well, we learned dividing exponents today, and it just blew my mind, and I just have no idea what to do with getting it. I didn't get it the first time. So asking them what sources do they think they need to meet that challenge, and then asking them what we as the adults can help to meet that challenge. Another thing to do is to ask them what steps did you take to earn that grade. If it's an A, still ask them how much time they spent working on that project. As I mentioned earlier, earning an A or a 100% can still be underachieving for your gifted kiddo. And that's that risk evader. So encouraging risk taking and going beyond the requirements of the assignment. So that's something that is important to encourage. And then another one, if it's a B or lower, still start that conversation with reflective thinking. If it's obvious that your kiddo spent very little effort, then look for ways to motivate your kiddo into spending more effort on the next project. And if your student worked hard, put forth great effort, praise that process and not the product. Because even if it's a B and you thought, man, my kid really should have gotten an A, still praise that process, especially if they worked so hard on earning that B. My Zelda, she brought home a grade and it was a B, and she worked her tail off the entire time to get that grade. And we praised that effort that she put into it and not the product itself. And so we talked about what we can do to make sure that the next time we can put forth that same effort, and maybe even we'll see a little bit of that growth on the skill. I talked a little bit about praising the right way. So it's not vague, it's not product fixated. Perfect, you're so smart, sheer perfection. I always think about Mary Berry on the older episodes of The Great British Bake Off. Sheer perfection was one of her things, and I thought, wow, what about it made it sheer perfection? Was it the combination of the flavors? Was it the bake time? What made it sheer perfection? And so we would instead want, well, hang on, I just went a little too far, sorry. So the wrong kind of praise then leads to a fixed mindset, the idea that intelligence is set. In one of my textbooks from the University of Connecticut,
I was amazed
it
that from
talks
Park
about,
Rapids it was 45 minutes.
and one of the
That was
things
it.
from perfection of that, if you have people telling you that you are perfect in middle school and elementary school when the curriculum is really cyclical, I mean a noun is a noun is a noun, you just may have to find out what that noun is. A theme is a theme is a theme. We just learn different ways of developing that theme. But if you call everything perfect for a student in elementary and middle school, then by the time they get to high school where that curriculum is no longer cyclical, they have no idea how to tackle the next part because product was focused on and not that idea of process. So that praise then is better if it is specific and process oriented. Your time and effort you spend on this paper show in the attention to detail you give to its development. Your careful planning and execution of your National History Day project show that you are passionate about the topic. And so that idea of praising that process and making sure that your kids see the effort that they are putting into something is really important. And it helps for those high ability learners to understand that process rather than product all the time is good. And the more they're able to do that now in the K-12 setting, and then even in the college setting, then the more they are able to execute better products in the real world setting. They're able to learn how to focus on the process, and then their products become excellent products. They may not be perfect, but they become exemplary products that their bosses may have wanted, or they're able to publish a book or even to compose a new symphony. And this final thing that I love, and yes, I made this poster and I'm super proud of my poster, and it's going to hang in my room, is the idea of positive presuppositions. And the idea that no matter the challenge or the outcome, presuppose the good things you'll gain from the experience. And then in parentheses, and I know it's tiny on the screen, it says, even disaster cupcakes can still taste good. I'm not the best baker. I make a mean cheesecake, but it may not always look pretty, but those calories are still going to be worth it because it tastes good. And so that's something that whenever I, as a parent, have one of my girls come up to me, they're all going to audition for a play, Miss Nelson is Missing. And we talk about, okay, well, what if you're not cast in the play? What's something that's good that you can still gain from that experience? And it's not always going to be, no, Mom, I really wanted to be in that play and I failed to get into that play. But the more they practice that and the more they repeat it to themselves, the more they're able to take on those new challenges. I will be hopefully graduating in December with all of my paperwork finally being finished so I can have my master's degree. And I'm already looking forward to applying for a program at Vanderbilt for Peabody there's a doctorate in education that I can work on. it terrifies me because it's Vanderbilt. And I'm come from K-12 setting. I'm the second generation college student. My mom is the only one in her side of the family who ever went to college. And so that idea that I can go to Peabody and earn a doctorate is terrifying to me. But even if I don't get into that program, I will have learned something from it, and I can carry that over into another experience. So I went over a lot of things. Here are some resources that I suggest you look up, including your own Nebraska Association for Gifted Children. I do go to the National Association for Gifted Children, NAGC. They have a lot of resources. Parents are invited to their NAGC conference every year. They have parent-specific breakout sessions. Then there's SING, SENG, supporting emotional needs of the gifted. And it's not just for your twice exceptional children, but it also looks at that affective idea that we need to make sure our students are whole people and not just machines to turn out products all the time. Hoagie's, I think the website is not so great anymore. A lot of the links were broken the last time I won it, but I am part of their Facebook group and they provide a lot of resources. And if you have questions about how to help your kiddo, you can ask them. And you have practitioners in gifted education, and you also have other parents who are in the same boat as you are there. And then, of course, the University of Connecticut Renzulli Center for Creativity, Gifted Education, and Talent Development. They've written many grants, and so a lot of their papers are housed and they are free to read. And they also have resources available there. And then I didn't know this at the time when I was making this paper, but this letting go of, or it was a project that I originally did for a class. Letting go of perfect came from doctoral students from the University of Connecticut for gifted, and I referenced it throughout. It was the same book that's at the bottom, and a lot of the materials, or a lot of the definitions, a lot of the clusters of types of perfectionism that I went over are in this book, along with more strategies that may be more specific to you. This book changed my life. I know I just did a brief, glorified book report of it in a lot of ways, but it helped me be a better teacher and a better parent, as well as a better student and professional. So I really suggest that you get it, and not just because I'm a fan of UConn. So here's some other of the resources that I have. Again, you'll be able to access a version of this PowerPoint from the Padlet. And here's the QR code to get to that Padlet. You can ask me questions there. If you want me to email you, that would be the best place to give me your email address. And then at the end of today and between now and tomorrow at this time, I will have some handouts for you. For those of you who don't want to use the QR code, it's tinyurl.com/Nebraska Perfectionism, and it will only have the materials that I talked about for the Nebraska presentation on that back channel. And I found out from Padlet, and I'm obsessed with Padlet, that they're getting rid of that back channel. So by June 30th, for sure, that Padlet will be gone. So if you have a specific question, please give me your email address so I can contact you. And if you want a specific handout, make sure you get it before the 30th. Okay, do I have any questions I can answer right now?
I know, Patty, that we all have kids that we know who can fit into one of those or multiple of those categories. And so we really appreciate you coming and talking and giving us all this excellent information. As always, it's a pleasure. And if anybody has any questions and they don't want to ask to the group, you can drop them in the chat, or Patty and I will be on for the next few minutes. Other than that, thank you guys, and the recording will be out tomorrow.